Ladies and gentlemen, we are now live. You, Chair Boyd.
All right, thank you, and good
I am
evening,
going to
everyone.
share the agenda.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our TAC committee. Unfortunately, we're not able to meet live, but the wonder of technology, we're able to meet virtually. I do need to say, well, first call to order. So it's at 7 o'clock we started the meeting. First wanted to say that as a result of the COVID-19 situation and Governor Northam's declaration of a emergency, the authority's technical advisory committee meeting is being held electronically. The recent passage of the amendments to House Bill 29, the Freedom of Information Act bill, which allows regional bodies such as the authority and their committees to conduct business meetings electronically. This evening's business meeting is being held remotely. Doing so will enable us to keep this top priority while ensuring that we're adhering to social distancing requirements. By electronic means is authorized because of the items in the May 20th, 2020 meeting agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the authority. House rules, if you're not, please mute your phone or your computer that you're using. There's background noise that tends to happen when other people are talking. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody being here. The next thing on the agenda, which I don't have in front of me, if you would, Rhea, remind me. The meeting minutes from last February. Those of us who were there, we should probably recommend the approval of the minutes if we even have a quorum to do so, because we have abstentions. I need a reading from Shri.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Very well. I need a motion to pass the minutes from last meeting, if you will.
Make a motion that the meetings be the minutes be approved. It's Pat Turner.
Come on, do you second? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I second.
Very well. All those that say who approve, say aye. Anybody say no? Let's do it that way. Easier. All right. Hearing none, the meeting minutes. Sorry, meeting minutes have been approved. So let's go to the next item on the agenda for discussion. I believe that goes to Shri.
Yes. So some of you have been, the members who are already there, you know that we are going through this 6-year program update now. We received 41 candidate projects, and we have been doing evaluations of those projects, quantitative model-based evaluations that comes up with 2 sets of rankings and ratings. One is congestion reduction relative to cost. We'll take up the congestion reduction happening that is attributed to each project, and from the date the project opens up until 2040, because that's the horizon year we are looking for in the model. So whatever congestion reduction that project can produce from the date the project is online until 2040, we add up that and divide that number with the total project cost. So that's kind of a cost benefit analysis we do. This is totally the model-based analysis is done by NVTA consultants. That's an independent consultant we selected. The second set of analysis is similarly done based on model analysis. We look at 15 different performance measures that we have on transaction and see how each project performs for those criteria. these are the two model-based evaluations we do. In addition, we look at a number of qualitative criteria, including how much funding you bring from other sources, or how, if you had received funding for other projects or for the same project, different phase in previous cycles, how well you spend that money, how well the project is moving. So it's like a past performance of your projects, your jurisdiction. The other criteria we look at include the local priority among all the applications you submitted, which projects is higher priority for you. So we look at these different aspects. In addition, the main criteria, one of the main criteria we also look at is public comment. We are in the middle of public comment period now until May 24th. We had public hearing last week. We received 27 people gave testimony either in person or by phone. So we collected that information, and we at this point, I think we are closed 350 comments by email on various projects. So we will be on after 24th, when the deadline is over, we will put all this information together and bring it back to the committees first, to you, to the PCAC, for your understanding that which projects are getting support or opposition, things like that. And based on all that, NVTA staff will develop a recommendation for which projects to be funded, and that will be again presented to you all. And based on that, you can have, based on all this evaluation information, public engagement, and staff recommendation, you develop recommendations to the authority.
Shri,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. This is really for Chair Boyce. Out of an abundance of caution, the resolution that you just read, would it be possible to take a vote on that, just so that everyone agrees that we are adhering to the rules as laid out by the recent FOIA waivers?
Good point, Keith. I'm sorry I missed that. We do have to have a motion to adopt that resolution so we can have the electronic meeting. I do apologize for skipping over that part. Anybody want to make a motion for that? Amy Morris makes the motion. Any second of the motion?
Second.
Patton Turner seconds. Anybody opposed to it, please speak. Hearing none, the motion is passed. We have adopted that resolution. I do apologize for missing that. So Shri, you can continue.
Sure. So as I said, we are now at the point where we are ending with the public comment period and then developing the staff recommendations that will be brought back to you all for your consideration, analysis, and you yourself will finally make bring a recommendation to the authority. That needs to happen at the next meeting. So make sure that is in next meeting is in your calendar, and you will be joining us for that meeting. Keith, do you want to add anything?
No, you did a good job. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Do we have a basic feeling for the comments that are coming in about this update?
Some of the big ones I have seen so far are supporting the Route 1 improvements in town of Dumfries. Another set of the two applications from City of Falls Church they're all getting a lot of support. There are other comments that support many other projects across the region: Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William. We heard a number of comments with concerns about the projects, WNOD improvement projects that's physically located in Arlington, but the application is submitted by Nova Parks. I don't have a number, how many supporting, how many opposing, or things like that at this point. We are still going.
Yeah, that's fine. I was getting the basic tenor of what we're getting. If it was supporting or saying no, we don't want that. So it sounds like mainly positive comments. That's always good. Anyone else on the committee have questions for Mr. Shree? Hearing none. Next on our list of festivities is the transaction update. Mr. Jasper.
Thank you, Chair Boyce. My name's Keith Jasper. I'm Principal in charge of Transportation Planning and Programming at NVTA, and I'll have to point out that I was briefing the City of Falls Church Council a couple of weeks ago on our 6-year program, and about this moment, my dog started going crazy. So I should try and pretend it's not happening if it happens, but if it is, I apologize. So transaction, as Shree mentioned in the pre-briefing, is the name we give our long-range transportation plan for NVTA covering the Northern Virginia region. And we update this on a 5-year cycle. And the previous update for the current transaction was adopted in October of 2017. And so we're looking to get the next update of transaction adopted by the end of calendar year 2022, which, working backwards, means we've actually already started. We had a kickoff event at the authorities meeting in January, where we invited any interested parties to offer thoughts and comments and suggestions to the authority at their regular January meeting, what we call a listening session. So we're now kind of working towards procurement activity, as well as doing a number of things within staff resources as well in parallel. Normally, with transaction and this committee, because some committee members have business interests, we try to be clear that any information we share is certainly available to anyone publicly. But anyone who participates in this conversation is in a potential conflict of interest situation if they are working for a firm that is thinking of submitting a response to our upcoming RFP on this, whether as a prime or a sub. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm not planning to share any information this evening which would really get into a conflict situation, but any discussion might lead to that. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that and act accordingly. At the moment, for the overall transaction updates, we are looking at a scope of work which is based upon the scope of work that we used in the previous update cycle, but one that's been enhanced by the lessons that we learned during that update, and further updated to reflect the fact that we now live in a changing world, or a changed world, since we were at the equivalent point 5 years ago. We are continuing to focus on technical competencies and public engagement skills as primary factors in the firm we'll be looking for to be our consultant on this, and that's no different from previously. In overall schedule terms, we expect to have the RFP on the streets in late spring, and hopefully we'll have a selection approved by the authority in the fall of this year. And as I mentioned earlier, the adoption is targeted to occur by December of 2022. A couple of areas which are slightly different, which I will share, because I don't think this is going to be favourable for anyone. We're looking at structuring the work into 3 more distinct phases than we did previously, to kind of reflect some front end preparatory work the consultant will need to do in terms of public engagement activities and model development activities. That'll be phase 2 will be a period of very intense technical analysis, and phase 3 will be a longer period of reporting, additional public engagement, but more formal through a hearing process and a formal public comment process. So they're the 3 phases of work that we'll be looking at. We wanted to structure it that way more than we did last time, just to kind of help maintain schedule for each of those 3 phases. The phases themselves are no different, but they just weren't formalized before. We're going to formalize them this time. A couple of other things of significance here. We're looking at this next update of transaction to help NVTA staff to build its in-house modelling capabilities. It may or may not surprise you to know that NVTA does not have in-house modelling capabilities, which for an organisation that's responsible for developing and updating long-range transportation plans and evaluating the impacts of funding applications that are submitted to us, all our modelling work is outsourced. And much of it will continue to be outsourced, but there's a lot of modelling work we could do in-house, for which we either have to rely on a consultant or just simply the work doesn't get done. And we want to address that as part of this update cycle. The other thing that's going to be particularly significant is that Shree's mentioned we've already got our fiscal year 2020 to 2025 6-year program in process right now, coming to the end of that process. But before we finish the transaction update, we'll also be working through our fiscal year 2022 to 2027 6-year program update. So there will be a period of time where we'll be undertaking both of our primary responsibilities in parallel. We're kind of doing that a little bit at the moment, but it'll be much more so for this next update cycle for transaction and the next update cycle for the 6-year program. So one of the things what that'll actually result in is that in calendar year 2022, we'll end up having a public hearing, a public comment period in the spring for the 6-year program update, and then a public hearing and a public comment process in fall for the transaction update. And I don't recall we've ever done 2 public hearings and 2 public comment periods in the same calendar year before. So we're still doing a lot of things for the first time here at NVTA, and that's likely to continue for the duration of this next transaction update cycle. So that's the update on the plan overall. I just wanted to share a couple of additional thoughts on some things that are ongoing at the moment. But maybe Chair Boyce, maybe it might be appropriate if we just take a pause there and just see if there's any questions before I get onto these final points.
Yes, very good. Anybody have any questions on the committee? I will reiterate about the conflict of interest on this RFP that is coming out. I'm sorry, Frank, do you have something?
Yeah, I'm talking about the RFP. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion on many of the forums and also that I look into and also in the general press about how travel patterns are likely to be either both short and long-term affected by the results of the shutdown that we've had and fears about the virus. Has there been thought given to how we would want that addressed in the RFP that's about to be issued?
Thanks so much for that question. You very perceptively asked something that I was about to get onto, but took the pause instead. So if you wouldn't mind holding that thought, I'll come back to that in just a moment.
Very good. Just where I was going with the conflict of interest, I know my firm has decided to not pursue this RFP. I want to make sure that Amy, Karen, and Frank, our new members, recognize that further conversation on this transaction update, you'll need to recuse yourself if you're going to be a sub or a lead on that with your respective firms. Karen, I apologize. I don't recall what firm you're with, if you would even be interested in such a thing. But I just want to make sure that our new members recognize that this RFP is a no-go for you if you want to be discussing it in the committee. You can't do both. So
Understood. That's fair.
I'm good as well.
thank you. Keith, you can go about answering Mr. Frank's question.
Okay, excellent. Certainly the pandemic and post-pandemic recovery and its impacts on transportation has been consuming us in many ways. I mean, first and foremost, it's had an impact on NVTA's revenues, as it has probably for every government agency in the country. So that's kind of been at the forefront of it. But you know, very, very closely behind that. I mean, that's the thing that occupies the minds of my CFO. What's occupying my mind is the transportation side of that. To that end, we're actually taking three kind of related parallel activities right now. First off and simplest, we're using some big data sources that we have access to monitor impacts, essentially from pre-pandemic, to just kind of get an understanding how this is affecting Northern Virginia in kind of real time, looking both on the highway side and on the transit side, AADT, ridership, congestion patterns, and so on. So that's ongoing and fairly straightforward. Secondly, we've opened a really intense dialogue with the Northern Virginia business community to get a sense as to where they are and where they may be headed with things in particular like work from home arrangements, and what's working for them, what isn't working for them, and how they kind of view the next months and years in terms of their internal policies and practices. This particularly relates to companies' IT and HR departments, because you've got to have the authority to work from home, you've got to have the technical capability to work from home, and then I'm sure managers and supervisors everywhere will be wanting to be sure that productivity is as close to unaffected as possible, unless of course it's improving, in which case that's great. Obviously, we also recognize that for some people, work from home isn't an option. So for essential workers and others, who are in the entertainment business or the leisure business and so on, there's a lot of pain and not many silver linings. at the moment. So, yeah, there's a lot going on in that sense. So the discussion with the business community is a big thing. And then the third piece of this is some new work that we've recently had authorized by the authority to basically to pick up from where we left off on some in the previous transaction update, looking at what we initially called scenario analysis, but really it's probably better understood if you think of it as sensitivity analysis, where we look at a number of different examples that are not, they're like the central forecast for the future that comes from TBB, but are perhaps things that while we're not preferring them or predicting them, they might be plausible alternate futures. And to understand what those impacts associated with those alternate futures might be. So this is what we did in the previous transaction update with a particular focus on technology, transportation technology impacts. And I'm sure we'll be looking at similar things to that in the next transaction update. But in the meantime, we felt there was an urgency to look at some specific pandemic and post-pandemic scenarios, and I can give you some examples of these. We haven't finalized these because we've only recently got approval for this task, so we're still kind of working through the details. But things like, what would be the impact of, say, a surge in single occupant vehicle use, which is, I know, something that is feared in some quarters, particularly even in the DC region, where General Manager of WMATA has indicated, transit's not going to come back until next spring at the earliest, and even there's some direction to kind of encourage people to not use transit, even if it does come back, to allow space for essential workers and so on. So the surge in SOV use is something that is possible, and obviously, individual users' preferences might also be a factor, no matter what any government agency is saying to them. There's also the prospect, and indeed the hope that there might be an increased level of work from home compared to normal levels of work from home, which in our region is actually well placed to do that, setting aside those who can't work from home because of security and clearance reasons. There's a lot of professional companies involved in the high-tech world who can work from home. If, for instance, NVTA's 12 staff have all been working from home since late March and continue to do so until the executive director tells us otherwise. And that actually is working out just fine for us. We did some planning ahead of time and just to test our systems of work and make sure everybody had everything they needed. And that actually has worked out really, really well for us. And I think other firms have had similar experiences. Limitations on use of shared mobility, I mentioned that already, and the potential for increased use of mobility, which is more active in nature, such as biking and walking. So these are possible scenarios that we'll look at. These activities are interrelated, particularly getting inputs from the business community as to how they feel that that their futures might play out. And so what we want to do this is why we want to do it so quickly, is because with this impending update to transaction, we wanted to learn what we could now while it's high in people's minds, and then potentially look to drill deeper into this when we actually get more into the full transaction update. But in the meantime, to potentially identify ways in which we can work with the private sector to reinforce the silver linings and begin to identify and potentially address some of the less desirable outcomes from this. A very long answer to your question, Frank, but I hope that's kind of getting to where you were headed. I'm not sure if Frank was responding or not. I can see he's on mute, but
I was just thank you.
okay, good enough. I've got one other thing I wanted to mention, and then you'll be done with me. Transaction is a needs-driven plan, and although it looks out 20, 25 years into the future, as Sri mentioned earlier, it's not only is it one of our two primary responsibilities, the other being our 6-year program. These two primary responsibilities are joined at the hip. They don't exist in a vacuum and independent of each other. Quite the opposite. Sri mentioned if it's not in transaction, we can't fund it with our regional revenues through our 6-year program. But it's a needs-driven process, and this is kind of headlined by the vision and goals that are very much at the front end of the transaction process. The vision and goals we've used for transaction over the 3 or 4 update cycles that I'm aware of have generally focused on things like quality of life and economic vitality of Northern Virginia and Northern Virginians. And that won't change, I'm sure, for this next update. But we're looking and have initiated a process internal, using staff resources, both at NVTA and our member jurisdictions and partner agencies. We've started looking at possible enhancements to the vision and goals, which will eventually have to be approved through the authority, and I hope will come through this committee, probably not next month, but potentially at your July meeting, to get your insights on it as well. And so we're looking at in this update to the vision to potentially kind of make more emphasis on the sustainability wording that's in the current vision statement. And I don't have the words in front of me, but it does reference sustainability. But what we're thinking we'd actually like to explore is being a bit more upfront and even a bit more forceful, perhaps, in terms of resiliency for the Northern Virginia transportation system. And so we're working on some wording right now with an updated vision and associated and necessarily updated goals, which eventually, as we go through the transaction process, will lead to refined objectives, potentially new performance measures, and potentially new weights associated with the performance measures. But in the near time, we do want to share the suggested updates to the vision and goals as part of the process to getting the authority to approve those. We won't be asking for any approval of objectives and measures, because that actually needs a fair amount of public engagement, which can't happen until 2021 anyway. So we won't be getting into that much detail, but vision and goals is definitely something that we do want to revisit in the not too distant future with the Technical Advisory Committee. And with that, I'll take any further questions. And if not, I won't.
Thanks, Keith. Any additional questions on that? I'll note that traffic dropped after September 11th, 2001, after the terrorist attacks, but traffic came back because this area is a growth area. Yeah, not planning to stop anytime soon. So I think, yeah, it's down. I'm already seeing traffic increase on the highways because I'm going into the office every day anyway. Not sure if it's going to be forever. I think it's going to be more of a blip, but opinion without any basis of fact. So next on the list, NVTA update, Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Chairman Boyce. I believe between Keith and Shree, they've stated everything that I had to say. I would like to just ask the new members, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything of that nature, feel free to give me a call or an email. Look forward to meeting everyone in person. The one thing I do want to know, I know Shree discussed this earlier regarding the estimated amount we'll have available to populate the 6-year program. The authority, we were successful in partial restoration regarding the 102 million that was diverted to Metro back in 2018. The bill, the transportation omnibus bill, through that bill, we got 50 million back, although 30 million of that will be delayed due to the revenue impacts of COVID-19. One thing the authority definitely wants to do is try to get full restoration. So that's something you'll hear about as the TAC continues to meet, as we continue to go through the process of updating transaction. And again, transaction is unconstrained fiscally and geographically. We do use that as the vehicle to populate and program the 6-year program. And as the needs always outweigh the revenues available, but I did want to inform this committee of that.
Great, thank you. Do you have anything else to add?
I do not.
Okay. Well, we kept it under the 59-minute rule. This is good. I would ask, and I would ask, because some of the the first meeting we had at 6:30, the orientation, there was a couple items that I think we need to address with the members. If we can ask them to hold on and stop the live stream after that, would that be appropriate? I hope it's appropriate.
You.
Chairman Boyce, would you like me to stop the live streaming now?
Yeah, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Okay.
If we need to do Robert's orders, then somebody make a motion to adjourn, and then we'll go about our way.
Yeah, if you can make the motion to adjourn, I can go ahead and stop the live stream.
Amy?
Motion to adjourn.
Anybody? Armand, seconds. Anybody opposed, please speak. All right, thank you. We are adjourned. And let me know.